The contract was simple: marry her, save his empire, but never touch her heart. But when she whispered, "Thank you for being kind," on their wedding night, Daniel Ashworth realized he'd just signed away his soul to the one woman who could actually save it. Welcome back to Evergreen Gracie Stories. Thank you so much for sticking around with me throughout our trying season. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into the story. Manhattan, 6:47 a.m. Daniel Ashworth's reflection stared back from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, 43 floors above the city that once worshipped him. The man in the glass looked exactly like the billionaire everyone expected. Sharp jaw, designer suit tailored to perfection, steel gray eyes that had closed 1,000 deals. But reflections, Daniel had learned, were just another kind of lie. "Sir?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, tentative as a prayer. "The board members are here." Daniel's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Ethiopian blend, $300 a pound, now tasting like ash in his mouth. In 30 minutes, those board members would strip him of everything. Ashworth Industries, the empire his grandfather built with bloody knuckles and borrowed dreams, would become another corporate casualty. All because Daniel had trusted the wrong people, signed the wrong papers, believed his own legend of invincibility. "Send them in, Patricia." The mahogany doors opened like jaws, and 8 men in identical suits filed in, corporate vultures circling a dying king. Richard Blackstone led the pack, his smile sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Daniel," Blackstone's voice dripped false sympathy, "you know why we're here." "The Henderson account," Daniel said, not bothering to stand. "60 million in losses, I know." "It's not just Henderson anymore." Blackstone placed a folder on Daniel's desk like a death certificate. "Cartwright pulled out this morning. So did Morrison Steel. Word is spreading that Ashworth Industries can't deliver. Your reputation—" "My reputation," Daniel interrupted, his voice cutting through Blackstone's speech like ice through warm butter. "Built this company from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. One bad quarter doesn't erase 30 years of success, but..." Even as he spoke the words, Daniel felt them crumble. One bad quarter had become 2, then 3. Trusted employees had embezzled millions. Key clients had defected to competitors. The golden boy of Manhattan business was tarnishing in real time, and everyone could see it. Blackstone leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "There is one option. A way to save the company. Save your legacy." Daniel's jaw clenched. He'd heard whispers about Blackstone's solution for weeks, dismissed it as desperate gossip. But desperate times had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. "The Hartwell account," Blackstone continued. "Old Thomas Hartwell's been looking for a way into Manhattan society for his daughter. He'll invest $200 million in Ashworth Industries, more than enough to stabilize everything. But he has one condition. I won't prostitute myself for marriage, Daniel. Clean, legal, binding. You marry his daughter Lily, and Hartwell writes the check. Think of it as a strategic alliance." The silence in the room was deafening. Daniel's mind churned through the mathematics of survival. 200 million would not only save Ashworth Industries, but position it for unprecedented growth. His employees, good people with families, mortgages, dreams, would keep their jobs. His grandfather's legacy would survive. What's she like? The question escaped before Daniel could stop it. Blackstone's smile turned predatory. "Let's just say she won't be competing for any beauty pageants. But she's agreeable, quiet. She understands this is business, not romance." Ugly. The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood. They wanted him to marry an ugly woman to save his empire. The irony was almost poetic. The man who'd never dated anyone below a 9 on the social beauty scale, who'd graced magazine covers with supermodels and actresses, reduced to bartering his marriage bed for survival. Daniel stood slowly, walked to his window, and stared down at the city that had made him and was now breaking him. Somewhere down there, people were falling in love, building real connections, creating lives that mattered beyond stock prices and profit margins. When had he stopped being one of those people? When had his heart become just another asset to leverage? The paperwork? He asked, his voice hollow. Already prepared. The wedding is scheduled for this Saturday. Hartwell wants this handled quickly, quietly. No media circus. Daniel nodded once, sharp and final. Set it up. As the board members filed out, victorious smiles on their faces, Daniel remained at the window. In the reflection, he saw a man who'd just sold his soul to save his grandfather's dream. The question was, what was left of Daniel Ashworth after the transaction was complete? Millbrook, Connecticut. Same day, 2:30 p.m., 3 hours north of Manhattan, in a world that measured wealth in kindness rather than stock options, Lily Hartwell knelt beside her father's hospital bed and tried to memorize his face. Thomas Hartwell had once been a giant, 6'4" with hands that could fix anything, a laugh that could fill a room, and a heart big enough to house half the county. Now cancer had whittled him down to paper and prayer, but his eyes still held that gentle strength that had been Lily's anchor for 28 years. "You don't have to do this, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. "I've lived a full life. If the treatment doesn't work, don't." Lily pressed her finger gently to his lips. "Don't you dare give up on me now, Dad. Not when we're this close." She pulled the contract from her purse, thick legal papers that would change everything. The experimental treatment in Switzerland cost $500,000. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Their savings were already exhausted. But Daniel Ashworth needed a wife, and Thomas Hartwell needed his daughter to have a future. It was perfect, except for the part where Lily would be marrying a man who'd probably close his eyes and think of stock portfolios. "He's not going to." "Love you," her father said, reading her face the way he always could. "This Ashworth fellow, men like him, they see the world differently." Lily smoothed her father's thinning hair, the gesture automatic after months of hospital visits. "I'm not expecting love, Dad. I stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago." It was true. At 28, Lily had made peace with her reflection. She wasn't conventionally beautiful. Her face was too round, her body too soft, her features too ordinary for a world obsessed with Instagram perfection. She'd been passed over, ignored, and pitied by enough men to understand her place in the social hierarchy. Plain women got steady jobs, good friends, and the satisfaction of being valued for their minds and hearts. They didn't get billionaire husbands or passionate love stories. "You deserve to be cherished," her father insisted, his grip on her hand surprisingly strong. "You're the most beautiful soul I've ever known." Lily smiled, tears threatening to spill. "Your opinion might be a little biased. A father's love sees clearly," Thomas said. "Promise me something, Lily. Promise me you won't let this man diminish you. You're worth more than whatever he's paying for this arrangement." The words hit harder than they should have. $200 million. That's what Daniel Ashworth was investing to acquire a wife. The math was brutal. Lily was worth exactly what her father's company and her own compliance could provide. Nothing more, nothing less. But her father was dying, and love was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I promise, Dad." She kissed his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave, mixed with hospital antiseptic. "I'll remember who I am." As she drove home through the Connecticut countryside, past farms and families, and simple lives untouched by corporate desperation, Lily tried to imagine her future, a loveless marriage to a man who needed her bank account more than her heart, a Manhattan penthouse where she'd be the ugly secret hidden behind designer clothes and social obligations. A life where she'd be grateful for kindness and never dare to hope for passion. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Wedding rehearsal Friday, 6 p.m. St. Patrick's Cathedral. Don't be late. D. Ashworth. Lily stared at the message. Terse, businesslike, completely devoid of warmth. This was her future husband, and he couldn't even be bothered to introduce himself properly. She was about to become Mrs. Daniel Ashworth, and she didn't even know if he liked coffee or tea. But as she pulled into her driveway, past the garden her mother had planted before cancer took her too, Lily felt something unexpected. Determination. She might be the ugly bride in this corporate fairy tale, but she was still Thomas Hartwell's daughter. She had a backbone made of quiet steel and a heart that hadn't yet forgotten how to hope. Daniel Ashworth was getting more than he bargained for. He just didn't know it yet. What do you think shaped Lily's quiet strength? Was it growing up with loss or something deeper? Share your thoughts below, because understanding what makes someone resilient might just change how we see our own hidden power. The Plaza Hotel, Presidential Suite, 11:47 p.m. The wedding had been a masterpiece of efficient emptiness. 200 guests who barely knew the bride, vows recited like quarterly reports, and a reception where Daniel had spent more time checking his phone than looking at his new wife. Now, standing in the marble entryway of their honeymoon suite, the weight of what they'd done settled between them like a third presence. Lily clutched her small overnight bag, still wearing the cream-colored dress that had cost more than most people's cars. Daniel's stylist had insisted on appropriate attire for an Ashworth bride. She looked like she was dressed for someone else's life, beautiful in a way that seemed borrowed, temporary. Daniel loosened his tie, the motion sharp and practiced. "I'll take the couch," he said without looking at her. "This doesn't have to be complicated." The word hung in the air between them, complicated, as if their marriage was a business merger that could be simplified with proper delegation of resources. As if the fact that they were now legally bound to each other was just another line item to manage. "Of course," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the city's hum 40 floors below. "I didn't expect... I know this isn't..." She stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. What had she been about to say? That she knew he found her repulsive? That she understood this was purely transactional? That she didn't expect him to want her, not even enough to share a bed on their wedding night? Daniel finally looked at her, really looked, and something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. She was standing there like she was apologizing for existing, her hands twisted together, her eyes fixed on the Persian rug beneath her feet. The designer dress couldn't hide the way she was folding in on herself, making herself smaller, less imposing, less of an inconvenience. When was the last time someone had looked at him with such careful consideration for his comfort? His business associates wanted his money. His ex-girlfriends had wanted his status. His employees wanted his approval. But Lily was standing in their honeymoon suite, worried about making him uncomfortable. "Would you like some wine?" The question surprised them both. Daniel hadn't planned to say it, hadn't planned to prolong this awkward ritual of politeness. But something about her careful vulnerability made him want to be kinder. Lily's eyes flicked up to his, startled. "Oh, if you're having some..." Daniel moved to the suite's bar, grateful for something to do with his hands. The silence stretched between them as he opened a bottle of Chateau Margaux, $500 wine that he couldn't taste past the bitter knowledge that his wedding night felt like a corporate retreat. "Here." He handed her a glass, careful not to let their fingers touch. Even that small consideration felt like a betrayal of the careful distance he was trying to maintain. "Thank you." Lily took a small sip, then another. The wine loosened something in her shoulders, or maybe it was the way Daniel was standing there looking almost uncertain. She'd never seen him anything but commanding in the few brief meetings they'd had to arrange this marriage. Now he looked like a man who just realized he was in over his head. The ceremony was lovely, she offered, then immediately felt foolish. Lovely? It had been a beautiful, expensive, completely hollow performance. Patricia organized everything, Daniel said, referring to his assistant. I thought efficiency was probably what you'd prefer. Efficiency. Lily took another sip of wine, feeling the word cut deeper than it should have. Of course he'd wanted their wedding to be efficient. Why waste time on romance or sentiment when you were acquiring a business asset? But then Daniel set down his wine glass and did something completely unexpected. He sat down on the suite's cream-colored sofa, not in the commanding pose she'd seen in magazine photos, but heavily, like a man carrying too much weight. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Lily blinked. In all her imaginings of this moment, she'd never pictured Daniel Ashworth admitting difficulty with anything. The marriage? Being married to someone I don't? He stopped, running a hand through his hair and messing up the perfect styling for the first time all day. "That came out wrong. Someone you don't find attractive," Lily finished for him, her voice steady despite the pain blooming in her chest. "It's okay, Daniel. I know what this is." Daniel's head snapped up. "That's not... Jesus, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" The question was simple, direct, and completely disarming. Daniel found himself looking at his new wife, really looking, for the first time since they'd signed the papers. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense that he was used to, but there was something in her face that made him want to keep looking. Intelligence, maybe. Or the kind of genuine curiosity that he'd forgotten existed. "I meant someone I don't know," he said finally. "I've spent my entire adult life believing that marriage was something that happened to other people. People who had time for feelings and connection. I built my world around the idea that those things were weaknesses I couldn't afford." Lily set down her wine glass and studied him. "And now? Now I'm sitting in a honeymoon suite with a woman who married me to save her father's life, and I can't figure out if I'm the villain or the victim in this story." The honesty in his voice hit Lily like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her own sacrifice, her own pain, that she hadn't considered what this might be costing him. Daniel Ashworth, the man who had everything, was sitting here admitting that he'd never learned how to want anything real. "Maybe," she said softly, "we're both just people doing the best we can with an impossible situation." Something in Daniel's chest loosened at her words. When was the last time someone had offered him that kind of grace? When was the last time anyone had suggested that his struggles might be understandable rather than pathetic? "Tell me about your father," he said suddenly. Lily's eyes widened. "What? Your father? The man you're doing this for? Tell me about him." For a moment Lily couldn't speak. No one had asked her about her father. Not the lawyers, not the wedding planners, not anyone involved in arranging this marriage. They all knew the transaction, but no one had cared about the love behind it. "He's..." she started, then stopped, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "He's the best man I've ever known. He taught me how to change a tire, and how to negotiate with contractors, and how to make his mother's apple pie recipe. When my mom died when I was 16, he never tried to replace her, but he made sure I knew I was still part of a family." Daniel watched her face transform as she talked about her father. The careful guardedness melted away, replaced by a light that made her features come alive. This was what she looked like when she wasn't apologizing for existing, radiant with love and fierce with loyalty. "The experimental treatment," she continued, "it's not guaranteed to work. The doctors give it maybe a 40% success rate. But he's all I have left, and 40% is better than the 0% we have without it. You love him very much. I love him enough to marry a stranger." "Nadam," the words came out before Lily could stop them, and she immediately flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply..." "Don't apologize." Daniel's voice was rougher than he intended. "You love him enough to marry a stranger. I respect the hell out of that." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of mutual understanding settling between them. Then Daniel did something that surprised them both. He moved to the couch beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something warmer, more human. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to save someone you love. For reminding me that some things are worth more than money." He paused, looking down at his hands. "For being kind to me when you have every right to resent what I'm asking of you." Lily felt tears threatening to spill. When was the last time someone had thanked her for being kind? When was the last time anyone had seen her sacrifice as brave rather than pathetic? "Thank you for saving my father's life," she whispered back, and then, without planning it, without thinking about the consequences or the careful distance they were supposed to maintain, Lily reached out and covered Daniel's hand with hers. The touch was electric, unexpected, completely inappropriate for a business arrangement. Daniel should have pulled away, should have reminded them both that this was a transaction, not a romance. Instead, he turned his hand palm up and let her fingers slip between his. "Lily?" he said, her name soft in his mouth for the first time. "Daniel." They sat there on their wedding night, two strangers who'd made a bargain with the devil, holding hands like teenagers afraid of their own hearts. And for the first time in years, Daniel Ashworth felt something that had nothing to do with profit margins or quarterly reports. He felt hope. The next morning, 6:23 a.m. Daniel woke to the sound of his phone buzzing against the glass coffee table, a harsh intrusion into the strange peace he'd found on the suite's couch. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was, or why his neck ached from sleeping at an awkward angle. Then reality crashed back. The wedding, the wine, Lily's hand in his, and the way her eyes had looked when she'd talked about her father. Shit, he'd let his guard down. Worse, he'd enjoyed it. Daniel grabbed his phone, grateful for the familiar anchor of business crisis. 17 missed calls, 43 emails, all marked urgent. The Henderson account was imploding faster than expected, and the board wanted an emergency meeting. Perfect. Work was something he understood, something that didn't require him to navigate the dangerous territory of genuine human connection. He glanced toward the bedroom door, still closed, behind which his wife was presumably sleeping. His wife. The word felt foreign in his mind, like trying on clothes that didn't fit. Last night, sitting on that couch with Lily's fingers intertwined, with his, he'd almost forgotten that their marriage was a business transaction, almost forgotten that she was supposed to be the ugly bride he'd married for convenience. But morning light had a way of clarifying things. Whatever moment of connection they'd shared was just wedding night nerves, wine talking, two people making the best of an awkward situation. Nothing more. Daniel dressed quickly, quietly in yesterday's clothes, then scrawled a note on Plaza stationery. "Emergency at the office. Patricia will arrange your moving schedule." D left it on the coffee table next to the empty wine glasses, evidence of a weakness he couldn't afford to repeat. 47 a.m. Ashworth Industries. "The moving truck will be there at 2, Patricia said, not looking up from her tablet as Daniel strode through the office like a man fleeing a crime scene. "Mrs. Ashworth's belongings are minimal. Apparently she's lived quite simply. Should I arrange for a decorator to help her settle into the penthouse?" Mrs. Ashworth. Even Patricia was using the title now, making it real in a way that made Daniel's chest tighten. "Whatever she needs," he said curtly, settling behind his desk and immediately pulling up the Henderson files. "And Patricia? I'll be working late for the foreseeable future. No need to wait dinner." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Should I inform Mrs. Ashworth?" "I'm sure she'll understand that business comes first." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but they were necessary. Daniel had built his empire on clear priorities and careful boundaries. One moment of sentiment couldn't be allowed to compromise 30 years of discipline. He threw himself into work with the desperate intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. By noon, he'd restructured the Henderson deal, placated 3 major investors, and scheduled meetings that would keep him in the office until well past midnight. But even buried in spreadsheets and strategy sessions, he found his mind wandering to the way Lily had looked when she'd talked about her father, the fierce love that had transformed her ordinary features into something luminous, the way her voice had broken when she'd thanked him for saving her father's life. Stop. She was grateful. Nothing more. Gratitude wasn't affection, and affection wasn't love. He'd seen enough gold diggers and social climbers to know the difference. Lily might be more subtle than most, but the principle remained the same. She'd married him for what he could provide, not for who he was. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like swallowing glass. Lily stood in the middle of Daniel's penthouse, surrounded by boxes containing her entire life, and tried not to feel like an intruder. The space was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Central Park, furniture that belonged in museums, art that probably cost more than most people's houses. It was also completely, utterly impersonal. There were no family photos, no books that looked like they'd been read for pleasure, no evidence that a human being with preferences and memories actually lived here. It was a showroom, not a home. "Where would you like me to put your father's chair?" asked one of the movers, gesturing to the worn leather recliner that had been Thomas Hartwell's favorite spot for 30 years. Lily looked around the pristine space, trying to imagine where her father's comfortable, lived-in furniture would fit among Daniel's architectural perfection. The chair would look ridiculous here, shabby and out of place, just like she felt. "The guest room," she said finally. "Put everything in the guest room." It was easier that way. Her things could stay contained, temporary, ready to be packed up again when this arrangement inevitably ended. She wouldn't contaminate Daniel's perfect life with reminders of ordinary people and ordinary love. After the movers left, Lily found herself alone in a space that cost more per month than most people earned in a year, feeling more isolated than she had in her tiny Connecticut apartment. At least there, surrounded by her mother's garden and her father's memory, she'd known who she was. Here, she felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's fairy tale. Daniel's note sat on the kitchen counter where she'd found it. 12 words that made it clear exactly where she stood in his priorities. Emergency at the office. Everything was an emergency when you were trying to avoid your wife. Lily understood. She really did. Last night had been an anomaly, a moment when wine and wedding nerves had created an illusion of connection between two people who were essentially strangers. He'd been kind to her, kinder than he needed to be, but kindness wasn't the same as wanting her there. She unpacked in the guest room methodically, hanging her simple clothes in a closet designed for someone with a much more extensive wardrobe. Her books looked lonely on the empty shelves. Her father's chair sat by the window like a guardian from another world. By evening, she'd transformed the guest room into something that felt almost like home. The rest of the penthouse remained untouched, a museum she was allowed to visit but not inhabit. When Daniel's assistant called at 8 to inform her that Mr. Ashworth would be working late and not to wait dinner, Lily wasn't surprised. When the same call came the next night, and the night after that, she began to understand the rhythm of her new life. She was Mrs. Daniel Ashworth in name only. In reality, she was a well-kept secret, hidden away in a guest room, existing at the edges of a life she'd never really be part of. 3 days later, 11:43 p.m. Daniel stood outside his own front door, key in hand, listening for sounds of life from within. The penthouse was dark except for a single light in what used to be his guest room. Lily's room now, apparently. He'd successfully avoided her for 3 days, leaving before she woke and returning after she slept. It was working perfectly. No awkward conversations, no unexpected moments of connection, No risk of confusing business with pleasure again. So why did he feel like he was slowly suffocating? Because you're an idiot, he told himself as he finally turned the key. Because you let one moment of vulnerability convince you that a transactional marriage could be something more. The penthouse was silent, but Daniel could smell something different. In the air. Something warm and lived in that hadn't been there before. He followed the scent to the kitchen and found evidence of actual cooking. A plate covered with foil. A note written in careful handwriting. I wasn't sure when you'd be home, but I made extra pasta in case you were hungry. Just reheat in the microwave. Lily Daniels stared at the note, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. When was the last time someone had cooked for him? When was the last time anyone had cared whether he ate dinner or not? Don't read into it, he warned himself. She's being polite. Nothing more. But as he stood in his sterile kitchen, holding a note from his wife who cared enough to leave him dinner, Daniel felt the careful walls he'd rebuilt starting to crack again. From down the hall he could hear the soft sound of music, something classical and melancholy. Lily was awake, probably reading in that chair from her father's house, existing in the small space he'd allowed her in his life. Daniel took a step toward the sound, then stopped. He'd worked too hard to maintain the proper distance between them. Whatever moment they'd shared on their wedding night was over. This was business, pure and simple. He turned and walked to his bedroom, leaving the pasta untouched on the counter. But as he lay in his king-size bed, staring at the ceiling, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the careful way Lily had written his name on that note. Like she'd been practicing how to be his wife, like she was trying just as hard as he was to pretend their wedding night had meant nothing at all. What happens when two people are both running from the same thing? Each other. Have you ever found yourself pushing away exactly what you needed most? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes the thing we resist most is the thing that could save us. Friday morning, 7:42 a.m. The call came while Daniel was reviewing quarterly projections, his third cup of coffee growing cold as he tried to focus on numbers instead of the memory of Lily's careful handwriting on last night's dinner note. Mr. Ashworth? Patricia's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. We have a situation. Daniel's stomach dropped. In his experience, situations that made Patricia panic usually involved federal investigations or hostile takeovers. How bad? Marcus. Wellington is calling for a vote of no confidence. He's convinced half the board that your personal circumstances make you unfit to lead the company. Personal circumstances. Daniel's jaw clenched. His marriage to Lily, the very thing that was supposed to save Ashworth Industries, was now being used as ammunition against him. What's his angle? He's telling people that a man desperate enough to marry for money can't be trusted with fiduciary responsibility, that your judgment is compromised. He wants to call an emergency board meeting Monday morning. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of corporate warfare settling on his shoulders. Marcus Wellington had been circling like a vulture, for months, waiting for any sign of weakness. Now he'd found it in the form of Daniel's marriage to a woman the New York social scene was already whispering about. There's more, Patricia continued. The Hartwell money won't transfer until after a 90-day review period. Wellington knows this. If he can remove you before the funds clear, he takes control of the company and blocks the transfer. Daniel finished the thought, his mind already racing through possible countermoves. What do we need? Unified board support, and... Patricia paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. You need to present a united front with your wife. Wellington is painting this as a marriage of desperation. If the board sees you two as a genuine partnership, they'll trust my judgment again. Daniel rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Set up the emergency meeting for Sunday instead of Monday. Give me time to prepare. Sir? About Mrs. Ashworth? I'll handle it. But as Daniel hung up the phone, he realized he had no idea how to handle anything involving Lily. He'd spent the last 3 days avoiding her, treating their marriage like a dirty secret he was ashamed of. Now he needed her to play the role of devoted wife in front of the most ruthless businessmen in Manhattan. The irony was bitter. To save his company, he needed to pretend his marriage was real. The problem was, after their wedding night, pretending was getting harder and harder to do. The penthouse, 8:15. Lily was making breakfast when Daniel walked into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like he'd slept at his desk again. She glanced up from the eggs she was scrambling, surprised to see him during daylight hours. "Good morning," she said carefully, gauging his mood. "I made extra if you're hungry." Daniel stopped short, caught off guard by the domesticity of the scene. Lily stood at his pristine stove in a simple yellow sundress, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking more at home in his kitchen than he'd ever felt. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to gather around her, making the space feel warm and lived in for the first time since he'd bought it. "I need to talk to you," he said, then immediately hated how harsh his voice sounded. Lily's face shuddered, her shoulders tensing. "Of course. Should I sit down?" The question was so careful, so prepared for bad news, that Daniel felt something twist in his chest. She thought he was going to end their arrangement, probably. Thought he was going to tell her the deal was off and send her back to Connecticut with her dying father and her broken dreams. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, then realized he had no idea what she was thinking. "I need your help." Lily blinked, clearly not expecting that. "My help?" Daniel found himself studying her face, looking for signs of calculation or opportunism, but all he saw was genuine concern, tinged with the same careful wariness she'd worn since moving into his penthouse. "There's going to be a board meeting Sunday. Some of the members are questioning my judgment about our marriage." "Oh." Lily turned back to the stove, but Daniel caught the flush of embarrassment that colored her cheeks. "I see. They think I married you out of desperation, that it makes me unfit to run the company. And they're right, aren't they?" Lily's voice was quiet, matter-of-fact. "About the desperation, I mean." The honesty in her words hit Daniel like a physical blow. She wasn't wrong. He had married her out of desperation. But hearing her say it, hearing the resignation in her voice, made him want to argue with her. "I need them to see us as a united front," he said instead. "A real couple, not a business arrangement." Lily turned to face him, and Daniel was struck by how tired she looked. Not physically tired, but emotionally exhausted, like she'd been carrying a heavy weight for too long. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come to the meeting with me. Let them see us together. Show them that our marriage is—" Daniel paused, struggling with the words. What was their marriage exactly? "That it's legitimate. You want me to lie. I want you to help me save the company that's paying for your father's treatment." The words came out sharper than Daniel intended, and he immediately regretted them. Lily flinched as if he'd slapped her, and Daniel saw the exact moment she rebuilt the careful walls around her heart. "Of course," she said, her voice perfectly controlled. "What time should I be ready?" "Lily, I didn't mean—" "It's fine, Daniel. I understand what this is." She turned off the stove and began cleaning up, her movements efficient and impersonal. "I'll play whatever role you need me to play." Daniel wanted to take the words back, wanted to explain that he wasn't trying to hurt her, that he was just scared and frustrated and completely out of his depth when it came to navigating a relationship that felt more real every day. Instead, he said, 2:00. Wear something. He stopped, realizing he was about to tell her to wear something that would make her look like she belonged with him. "Something appropriate for a billionaire's wife," Lily finished for him. "I understand." She walked past him, toward her room, and Daniel caught a whiff of her scent. Something soft and floral that had nothing to do with expensive perfume and everything to do with who she was. It made him want to reach out and stop her, to apologize, to explain that he was terrified of how much he was starting to need her. "Lily." She paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. Thank you, he said quietly, for helping me. Don't thank me yet, she replied without looking back. You might not like the wife I turn out to be. Sunday afternoon, Ashworth Industries. Boardroom Lily had transformed herself. Daniel barely recognized the woman who walked into the boardroom beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm like she had every right to be there. Gone was the careful, apologetic woman who'd been tiptoeing around his penthouse. In her place stood someone who carried herself like she'd been born to wealth and power. She wore a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Daniel's stylist had outdone herself, but it was the way Lily wore it that took his breath away. Confident, elegant, completely at ease with the 8 powerful men who turned to stare at her as they entered. "Gentlemen," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Lily." Marcus Wellington rose from his seat, his smile sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Ashworth, how lovely to finally meet you." "Mr. Wellington." Lily's voice was warm honey over steel. "Daniel's told me so much about you." Daniel hadn't told her anything about Wellington, but Lily delivered the line like she'd been studying corporate politics her entire life. She moved through the room like a queen greeting her subjects, asking thoughtful questions about the men's families, their businesses, their interests. "Your husband tells us you're from Connecticut," Wellington said, clearly fishing for ammunition. "Quite a change from small-town life to Manhattan society." "Change can be wonderful when it's with the right person," Lily replied smoothly, her eyes finding Daniel's across the room. "Daniel makes everything feel like an adventure." The look she gave him was so warm, so genuinely affectionate, that for a moment Daniel forgot they were acting. Then she moved to his side, slipping her hand into his with such natural ease that several board members exchanged glances. "Shall we begin?" Daniel asked, but his attention was divided between the presentation he needed to give and the woman beside him, who was playing her role so perfectly that he almost believed it himself. For the next 2 hours, Lily was everything a corporate wife should be: supportive but not submissive, intelligent but not threatening, charming without being obvious about it. She asked insightful questions about the company's environmental initiatives, shared a self-deprecating story about learning to navigate Manhattan traffic, and somehow made even the most skeptical board members smile. But it was the small gestures that sold the performance. The way she straightened Daniel's tie when she thought no one was looking, how she handed him water during his presentation without being asked, the proud smile she wore when he outlined his vision for the company's future. "You've got quite a partner there, Daniel," said Robert Chen, one of the more influential board members, as the meeting wound down. "Smart woman." "I'm a lucky man," Daniel replied, and for a moment, looking at Lily as she charmed his harshest critics. He almost meant it. Wellington wasn't giving up easily. "It's wonderful to see such devotion," he said, the word dripping with skepticism. "Though I have to wonder, Mrs. Ashworth, what drew you to Daniel? Was it love at first sight?" The question was a trap, designed to expose the transactional nature of their marriage. Daniel tensed, ready to intervene, but Lily simply smiled. "Do you know what I noticed about Daniel the first time we met?" she asked Wellington, but her eyes stayed on her husband. "He listened, really listened. In a world full of people who talk just to hear their own voices, he actually cared what I had to say." She reached out and touched Daniel's hand, the gesture so tender and natural that Daniel felt his breath catch. "That's when I knew," she continued. "Not love at first sight exactly, but recognition. Like my soul recognized his." The words hung in the air, beautiful and impossible and completely convincing. Even Wellington seemed momentarily disarmed by the quiet sincerity in her voice. As the meeting ended and the board members filed out, Daniel found himself alone with Lily in the conference room. She was gathering her purse, her performance over, and he could see the exhaustion settling into her shoulders. "You were incredible," he said quietly. Lily looked up, surprised by the genuine admiration in his voice. Did it work? Wellington's calling for a recess instead of a vote. He needs time to regroup. Daniel moved closer, studying her face. Where did you learn to do that? To read a room like that? You think someone like me wouldn't know how to handle powerful men? There was a hint of her old defensiveness in the question, but also something else. Hurt, maybe, that he'd been surprised by her competence. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Lily picked up her purse, the gesture final. Don't worry, Daniel. I played my part. Your board will vote to keep you. The Hartwell money will transfer, and everyone gets what they want. She was almost to the door when Daniel called after her. What did you mean? About recognizing souls? Lily stopped, her hand on the door handle. For a moment, Daniel thought she might actually answer, might give him a glimpse of whatever truth had made her words so convincing. Instead, she looked back at him with tired eyes and said, I meant whatever you needed me to mean. As she left, Daniel stood alone in the boardroom where he'd just watched his wife transform into everything he'd never known he wanted, and wondered when protecting his heart had started to feel like the stupidest thing he'd ever done. 3 days later, the penthouse, 2:17 a.m. Daniel found her on the terrace, curled in one of the outdoor chairs with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice barely a whisper in the pre-dawn darkness. He'd come home from another late night at the office to find the penthouse empty, except for the soft glow of light spilling through the terrace doors. I know, Dad. I know you're scared. Lily's voice was thick with tears she was trying not to shed. The doctors said the treatment is working, remember? Your numbers are improving. Daniel stopped in the doorway, knowing he should retreat, give her privacy. But something in her voice, a desperation he recognized from his own darkest moments, kept him frozen in place. No, you don't have to worry about the money, Lily continued, wrapping her free arm around herself as if she could hold her own. Heart together. Everything's taken care of. Daniel? He's been very generous. Generous. The word hit Daniel like a physical blow. She was talking about him like he was a benevolent stranger, not her husband. Like the $200 million he'd invested in saving her father was charity rather than the price of her companionship. I miss you too, she whispered. I know this isn't what we planned. I know you wanted me to marry for love, not this. But Dad, he's a good man. Complicated maybe, but good. And if this is what it takes to keep you alive— Her voice broke on the last words, and Daniel watched her shoulders shake with the force of grief she was trying to contain. He'd never seen her cry. Not during their wedding. Not when he'd been cruel about the business arrangement. Not even when he'd essentially ignored her for days. But here, alone in the darkness, talking to the father she was sacrificing everything to save. Lily was falling apart. I have to go, she said suddenly, straightening. Someone's here. She'd sensed his presence without turning around. Some sixth sense that came from a lifetime of being watched, judged, dismissed. When she finally looked at him, her face was carefully composed again, but her eyes were red-rimmed and vulnerable. I'm sorry, she said, standing quickly. I didn't mean to disturb you. I know it's late. Don't apologize. Daniel stepped onto the terrace, closing the door behind him. How is he? Lily blinked, surprised by the question. In the weeks since their wedding, Daniel had never asked about her father directly. The man whose life he was saving, whose daughter he'd married, had remained an abstraction. A business problem solved with money. Better, she said carefully. The experimental treatment is hopeful. But he's scared. He doesn't understand. Why I had to move so far away. Why I can't visit as often as I used to. You haven't told him about the marriage? I've told him I married a good man who's helping with the medical bills. Lily's smile was bitter. He thinks it's a love story. I couldn't bear to tell him the truth. Daniel moved to the terrace railing, looking out over the city that never slept. Below them, millions of people were living their lives, falling in love, building families, creating connections that mattered. When had he stopped being one of them? What would be so terrible about the truth? He asked quietly. That his daughter sold herself to save his life? Lily joined him at the railing, careful to maintain distance between them. That the man she married sees her as a business expense? That she's living in a beautiful prison, grateful for scraps of kindness from someone who can barely stand to look at her? I look at you. The words slipped out before Daniel could stop them, rough with an honesty that surprised them both. Lily turned to stare at him. What? I look at you, Daniel repeated, his voice steadier now. More than I should, more than is safe for either of us. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of his admission hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Daniel, tell me about before, he said suddenly. Before your father got sick. Before you had to marry a stranger. What was your life like? Lily hesitated, clearly not expecting the question. Why do you want to know? Because I realized tonight that I've been living with a woman for 3 weeks, and I don't know anything real about her. I know you love your father. I know you're braver than you think you are. And I know you can handle a boardroom full of corporate sharks without breaking a sweat. But I don't know who you were before all of this. The genuine curiosity in his voice undid something in Lily's chest. When was the last time someone had asked about her life because they actually wanted to know, not because they were looking for ammunition or pity? I was a teacher, she said finally. 3rd grade. I had a classroom full of 8-year-olds who thought I hung the moon, at least until they figured out long division was hard. Daniel found himself smiling. You loved it. I did. Lily's voice grew warm with memory. There's something magical about that age. They still believe in possibilities, you know. They think they can grow up to be astronauts and presidents and dragon slayers all at the same time. What happened to that? The believing in possibilities? Lily was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I was 22 when I realized I was invisible to men. Not ugly exactly, just forgettable. I'd watch my friends get asked out, get flowers, get swept off their feet, and I'd wonder what was wrong with me. Why I wasn't worth pursuing. Daniel's hands tightened on the railing. Lily, there was this man, Michael, a teacher at the high school where I worked. He was kind to me, paid attention when I talked, made me feel like maybe I wasn't invisible. After all, her laugh was bitter. Turns out he was just lonely and I was convenient. When someone better came along, someone prettier, more exciting, he dropped me without a second thought. He was an idiot. He was honest, Lily corrected. He told me exactly what I was worth to him. Nothing. The pain in her voice was so raw, so familiar, that Daniel felt something crack in his chest. He recognized that particular kind of wound, the one that came from learning your value could be measured and found wanting. After that, I stopped expecting to be chosen, Lily continued. I focused on things I could control. My students loved me, my father needed me, and that was enough. It had to be. And then your father got sick. And then my father got sick, she confirmed. And suddenly the only thing that mattered was keeping him alive. So when your people approached me with an offer, you said yes to save him, I said. Yes, because loving someone means you'll do anything, even marry a stranger who sees you as a business transaction, to keep them in the world. Daniel turned to face her fully, studying her profile in the city lights. Is that really what you think? That I see you as a transaction? Lily met his eyes, her expression carefully guarded. Don't you? The question hung between them, loaded with 3 weeks of careful distance and unspoken truths. Daniel could lie, could retreat behind the safe boundaries they'd established, could protect them both from the dangerous territory they were entering. Instead, he told her the truth. At first, yes. You were the solution to a problem, nothing more." He paused, struggling with words that felt too big for his mouth. "But that woman in the boardroom 3 days ago, the one who charmed my harshest critics and made them believe in us? The one who looked at me like I was someone worth believing in? That wasn't a transaction, Lily. That was—" "What?" "That was the woman I've been avoiding because she scares the hell out of me." Lily's breath caught. "Daniel, do you want to know why I really married you?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with honesty. "It wasn't just about the money. It was because when I saw your photo, when I read about what you were willing to sacrifice for your father, I recognized something in you that I'd lost in myself. The ability to love something more than your own fear." "You don't know me," Lily whispered. "I know you make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and you leave dinner for me even when I don't deserve it. I know you cry when you think no one can hear you, and you're brave enough to marry a stranger to save the person you love most. I know you transform yourself to help me fight my battles, and you do it without asking for anything in return." Daniel stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "I know that every time I look at you, I see everything I thought I was too broken to want." The confession hung between them like a spark in darkness, dangerous and beautiful and impossible to take back. "Don't," Lily said, but her voice was breaking. "Don't say things like that unless you mean them." "I mean them," Daniel said quietly. "That's what terrifies me." For a moment they stood there on the edge of something that would change everything. Two wounded people recognizing their own pain reflected in each other's eyes. Then Lily stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. "My father's getting better," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "The treatment is working. In a few months, when he's stable, when your company is secure, we can end this arrangement. We can both go back to our real lives." "What if I don't want to go back?" The question escaped before Daniel could stop it. Raw and vulnerable and completely exposed. Lily looked at him with something that might have been longing, or might have been grief. "Then you're braver than I am," she whispered, and walked back into the penthouse, leaving Daniel alone with the city lights and the terrible realization that somewhere between their wedding night and this moment, he'd fallen in love with his wife. 2 days later, 6:23 p.m. Daniel came home to the sound of laughter. Real, unguarded laughter that seemed to fill every corner of his sterile penthouse with warmth. He followed the sound to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, struck by a scene that belonged in someone else's life. Lily stood at the stove, flour in her hair and on her cheek, stirring something that smelled like childhood memories. But it wasn't just her presence that transformed the space. It was the way she'd made it hers. Fresh flowers on the counter, actual books scattered on the kitchen island, and somehow, impossibly, the austere penthouse felt like a home. "You're early," she said without turning around, as if she'd developed some sixth sense for his presence. There was no tension in her voice, no careful politeness. Just ease. "The Henderson crisis finally resolved itself," Daniel said, setting down his briefcase and loosening his tie. "What smells so incredible?" "Chicken and dumplings. My mom's recipe." Lily glanced over her shoulder, and Daniel was struck by how different she looked. Relaxed. Almost happy. "I called Dad this afternoon, and he was telling me about how the treatment is progressing faster than expected. I got a little celebratory in the kitchen." "How celebratory?" Lily grinned, an expression so genuine and unguarded that Daniel felt his breath catch. "I may have also made apple pie, and chocolate chip cookies, and I think there's a casserole in the freezer for tomorrow. You cook when you're happy. I cook when I'm nervous too, and when I'm sad, and when I'm—" She paused, flour-covered spoons suspended mid-stir. "I guess I just cook. Fair warning, if you keep me around much longer, you're going to gain 20 pounds. Keep me around." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to examine. After their conversation on the terrace 2 nights ago, they'd been orbiting each other carefully, both aware that something fundamental had shifted, but neither sure what to do about it. "I could use 20 pounds, Daniel said, moving closer, to peer into the pot. "I can't remember the last time I had a home-cooked meal." "Never?" Lily looked genuinely shocked. "What about when you were a kid?" Daniel's expression shuddered slightly. "My father believed in discipline and efficiency. Personal chefs were more reliable than family meals." There was a wealth of hurt in those carefully chosen words, and Lily felt her heart clench. She'd grown up with a father who made pancakes on Sunday mornings and insisted on family dinners even when money was tight. The idea of a childhood without that warmth seemed impossibly lonely. "Well," she said, bumping his shoulder gently with hers, "you're about to make up for lost time. Go change into something comfortable. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. "Comfortable? You?" "No, clothes that don't cost more than a car. Jeans, maybe? A t-shirt? Something that won't give you a panic attack if you spill sauce on it." Daniel stared at her as if she'd suggested he show up naked. "I don't own jeans." "Of course you don't." Lily's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Sweatpants? Pajamas? Anything that doesn't require dry cleaning?" "I have athletic wear." "Perfect. Go put on your athletic wear and come back here. We're having a proper family dinner." Family dinner. Daniel wanted to point out that they weren't a family, that this was still a business arrangement with an expiration date. But something about the way Lily was looking at him, expectant, hopeful, like she was offering him something precious, made the words stick in his throat. 20 minutes later, Daniel returned to the kitchen wearing Stanford track pants and a t-shirt that had probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, but was still the most casual outfit Lily had ever seen him in. She'd set the small breakfast table by the window instead of the formal dining room, with mismatched plates that somehow looked more inviting than his designer china. "This feels strange," Daniel admitted, settling into a chair that brought him closer to Lily than they'd been since their wedding night. "Good strange or bad strange?" "I'm not sure yet." Lily served him a plate of food that looked nothing like the precisely plated meals his personal chef usually prepared. It was comfort food, generous and imperfect, and somehow more appealing than any five-star restaurant he'd ever patronized. "Tell me something," she said, settling across from him with her own plate. "What did you want to be when you grew up? Before you knew you'd inherit an empire?" Daniel paused, fork halfway to his mouth. No one had asked him that question in decades. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I told you about my third graders and their dragon-slaying dreams." "Fair's fair." He took a bite of the chicken and dumplings, and something in his chest loosened at the simple, perfect comfort of it. "A pilot," he said finally. "I wanted to fly planes." "Commercial or military?" "Neither. I wanted to fly those little crop dusters, the ones that barely clear the treetops. I saw one at an air show when I was 8, and the pilot let me sit in the cockpit." Daniel's voice grew distant with memory. "He told me about flying low over cornfields at sunrise, how peaceful it was up there. Just you and the sky and the knowledge that you were helping things grow." Lily smiled. "That's beautiful. My father said it was impractical, frivolous, that Ashworths didn't play in the dirt for a living. And you listened to him. I was 8. I believed that fathers knew best." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "By the time I figured out he was wrong about most things, I was already too deep in the family business to change course." "You could still learn to fly," Lily said quietly. "It's not too late." Daniel looked at her across the table. This woman, who'd spent her entire adult life believing she wasn't worth choosing, encouraging him to chase dreams he'd buried 30 years ago. "What about you?" he asked. "If you could do anything, be anyone, what would you choose?" "I was doing it," Lily said simply. "Teaching, making a difference in small ways. I never wanted to change the world, just my little corner of it." "You miss it." Every day. She pushed food around her plate, suddenly melancholy. But the kids I was teaching, they'll be fine. They'll have other teachers who'll love them just as much. My father, he only has me. You gave up everything for him. I gave up some things for him, Lily corrected. But I gained something too. What? She looked at him, her expression soft and vulnerable. I learned that I was capable of more courage than I thought. And I learned that some risks are worth taking, even when you're terrified. Like marrying a stranger. Like marrying a stranger, she agreed. Like making dinner for someone who's never had a family meal. Like hoping that maybe, possibly, this arrangement might turn into something real. The admission hung between them, brave and terrifying and completely honest. Lily, I know what you said the other night, she continued, her voice gaining strength. About being too broken to want this. But Daniel, what if we're not broken? What if we're just careful? What if we've been protecting ourselves from something that might actually be worth the risk? Daniel set down his fork, his appetite forgotten. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the past month, I've been living with a man who leaves me dinner notes and worries about my father and looks at me like I matter. A man who's never had chicken and dumplings but pretends not to notice when I put too much salt in the gravy. You put too much salt in the gravy? Lily laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. Terrible, right? But you're eating it anyway because you're too kind to hurt my feelings. I'm eating it because it's the best meal I've had in years, Daniel said quietly. Salt and all. Something shifted in the air between them. A settling, like puzzle pieces finally finding their proper places. Daniel, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. What if we stopped pretending this was just business? What if we tried to make it real? The question was so simple, so devastating in its honesty, that Daniel felt every carefully constructed wall around his heart begin to crumble. I don't know how, he admitted. I've spent so many years believing that love was a luxury I couldn't afford that I'm not sure I remember how to do it. Maybe we could learn together, Lily said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. Maybe we could start with this, with dinner and conversation, and the radical idea that we might actually like each other. Daniel turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers the way they had on their wedding night. But this time, there was no wine to blame, no wedding nerves to explain away the connection. This time, it was just them, choosing each other. I like you, he said, the words feeling foreign but right in his mouth. I like the way you make my sterile penthouse feel like a home. I like that you cook when you're happy and that you've never once asked me for anything except the chance to save your father. I like that you see possibilities where I see problems. I like you too, Lily whispered. I like that you listen when I talk about my father. I like that you trusted me enough to be vulnerable in that boardroom. I like that you wear expensive track pants and don't own jeans and you still somehow make me feel like I'm worth something. They sat there in the fading light, holding hands across a table set with mismatched plates. And for the first time since their wedding, neither of them was pretending. So what happens now? Daniel asked. Now we finish dinner, Lily said, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were falling. And then maybe we watch a movie. And tomorrow we wake up and choose each other again. That simple? That simple. That complicated. That terrifying. That wonderful. Daniel brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The first truly intimate gesture he'd allowed himself since their wedding night. Okay, he said. Let's try. As they finished their imperfect, oversalted, absolutely perfect dinner, Daniel realized that somewhere between the chicken and dumplings and Lily's tears, he'd found something he'd never expected to have. A chance at happiness. Not the hollow victory of a successful business deal, but the simple, radical joy of being chosen by someone who saw all his flaws and decided he was worth the risk anyway. What's the most meaningful meal you've ever shared with someone? Sometimes, it's not the food that feeds us, but the love that flavors it. Share your story below, because connection over simple moments might just be the most powerful ingredient of all. 1 week later, the Metropolitan Museum. Gala, 8:47 p.m. Lily had never felt more beautiful or more terrified in her life. The emerald green gown Daniel's stylist had chosen transformed her into someone she barely recognized. Elegant, sophisticated, worthy of standing beside Manhattan's most powerful man. Diamond earrings that probably cost more than her father's house caught the light as she moved through the Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall, her hand resting on Daniel's arm like she belonged there. And for the past week, she'd almost believed. She did. Ever since their dinner conversation, something fundamental had shifted between them. Daniel came home earlier, sometimes bringing takeout from restaurants she'd mentioned wanting to try. They'd started watching old movies together, sharing the couch like a real couple, her feet tucked under his thigh while he absently traced patterns on her ankle. He'd even bought jeans, expensive designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's rent, but jeans nonetheless. This morning she'd woken to find him making coffee in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes from another late night at the office, but humming under his breath like a man who had something to be happy about. "You look nervous," Daniel murmured as they approached a cluster of Manhattan's social elite, his breath warm against her ear. "I am nervous," Lily admitted. "I'm about to meet the people who decide whether I'm worthy of you." "They don't get to decide that," Daniel said, his voice firm. "No one does except us." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it made Lily's chest tight with panic. Because as much as she wanted to believe they were building something real, she knew tonight would test whether their fragile new connection could survive the brutal scrutiny of Daniel's world. "Daniel!" A woman's voice cut through the museum's genteel murmur, sharp and commanding. "There you are. We need to talk." Lily felt Daniel tense beside her as a stunning brunette approached, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and confidence that suggested she'd never doubted her place in any room. "Victoria," Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. "Lily, this is Victoria Blackstone, Richard's daughter." "Victoria, my wife, Lily." Victoria's eyes swept over Lily with the precision of a scanner, cataloging every detail and finding most of them wanting. Her smile was perfectly crafted, warm enough to seem polite, cold enough to establish dominance. "So you're the mystery woman who finally captured Daniel's heart," Victoria said, extending a manicured hand. "How refreshing." The word refreshing dripped with condescension, and Lily felt every hard-won bit of confidence drain from her body. This was Daniel's world. Beautiful, sophisticated women who moved through society like queens, who'd probably been groomed from birth to be the perfect corporate wife. "It's lovely to meet you," Lily managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Daniel." "Darling," Victoria continued, effectively dismissing Lily from the conversation. "Daddy's been telling everyone about your little domestic arrangement. So clever of you to solve two problems at once. Save the company and secure a wife who'll be grateful enough to never cause problems." Lily felt the words hit like physical blows. Little domestic arrangement. Grateful enough to never cause problems. She glanced at Daniel, waiting for him to correct Victoria's characterization, to defend their marriage, to show some sign that the past week had meant something to him. Instead, Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Victoria," he said. Finally, his voice clipped. "I think you've had enough champagne." "Oh, please," Victoria laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "Everyone knows the truth, Daniel. Your little charity case here needed money for her father's medical bills, and you needed a wife who wouldn't interfere with your real life. It's actually quite practical." Charity case. The words echoed in Lily's head, confirming every insecurity she'd spent the past week trying to overcome. She looked around the room and saw other guests watching them, whispers starting to ripple through the elegant crowd. "At least she's not pretentious," Victoria continued, seemingly oblivious to the damage she was inflicting. "I imagine she's just grateful to be here. So much easier than dealing with a woman who has expectations." "That's enough," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking around the room too, calculating the social cost of making a scene, weighing his reputation against his wife's dignity. And in that moment of hesitation, Lily saw the truth. He was embarrassed by her. Oh, he'd grown fond of her over the past weeks, enjoyed their domestic evenings and her home-cooked meals. But when faced with his real world, the world of Victoria Blackstone's and social hierarchies and business relationships, she was still just the awkward arrangement he'd made to save his company. "You know what?" Lily said, her voice bright and brittle. "Victoria's absolutely right. I am grateful. Grateful for the opportunity to see how the other half lives, even if it's just temporary." She slipped her hand from Daniel's arm, the gesture, final and devastating. "Excuse me," she continued. "I think I need some air." Lily walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, her head high despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind her she could hear Daniel calling her name, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see whether he was following her or staying to manage his reputation. She made it to the museum's front steps before the tears came, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. The doorman looked concerned, but Lily waved him away, wrapping her arms around herself in the evening air. Stupid, she told herself. Stupid to think it could be real. Stupid to believe a man like Daniel Ashworth could actually fall in love with someone like you. "Lily, wait!" She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, his face stricken. But it was too late. The damage was done, the fragile trust they'd built shattered by his moment of hesitation. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand to stop him from coming closer. "Just don't." Victoria was being cruel. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Doesn't she?" Lily's voice was raw with pain. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like she knew exactly what she was talking about. Your little domestic arrangement. Your charity case who should be grateful enough to never cause problems." "I didn't say any of those things." "No, you didn't," Lily agreed. "But you didn't deny them either. When she called me your charity case, when she reduced our marriage to a business transaction, you stood there calculating whether defending me was worth the social cost." Daniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. "That's not—" "It is," Lily said, her voice breaking. "And the worst part is, I can't even blame you. Because she's right, isn't she? I am your charity case. I did marry you for money. And I have been grateful, so pathetically grateful for every scrap of attention you've given me that I convinced myself it was something more." Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Let him see what his moment of hesitation had cost. "The past week," Daniel said desperately, "what we've been building was a fantasy," Lily finished. "A lovely, temporary fantasy that I let myself believe because I wanted so badly to be worth choosing. But we both know the truth, don't we? When it mattered, when your reputation was on the line, you chose silence over me." "Lily, please—" "I'm going home," she said, already turning toward the street to hail a cab. "To the penthouse, I mean. Your home. I'll pack my things tonight." "Where will you go?" The question stopped her cold. Where would she go? Back to Connecticut, to the house she could no longer afford. To her dying father to explain that the marriage that was supposed to save his life had fallen apart because she'd been foolish enough to want love along with the money? "I don't know," she whispered. "But I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not, and I can't watch you pretend that I'm someone you actually want." A cab pulled up to the curb, and Lily moved toward it with the desperate efficiency of someone fleeing a disaster. "Lily," Daniel called after her, his voice raw with something that might have been panic. "Don't do this. Don't leave." She paused with one hand on the cab door, looking back at him one last time. In his tuxedo, framed by the museum's grand entrance, he looked like everything she'd never quite believed she deserved. Powerful, sophisticated, impossibly handsome, and completely unreachable. "Give me one reason," she said quietly. "One reason that has nothing to do with business or contracts or convenient arrangements. Tell me you love me, Daniel. Tell me I'm not just a problem you solved with money." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything he couldn't say, and everything she'd never hear. Behind him, through the museum's glass doors, she could see the gala continuing. Victoria Blackstone probably already spreading the story of Daniel Ashworth's unstable wife to anyone who would listen. "I thought so," Lily said, and got into the cab. As they pulled away from the curb, she looked back once to see Daniel still standing on the steps, his hands clenched at his sides, watching her disappear into the Manhattan night. He looked like a man who'd just lost something precious, but wasn't sure he had the right to mourn it. Lily closed her eyes and tried not to think about the empty penthouse waiting for her, or the suitcases she'd have to pack, or the life she'd have to rebuild from the ashes of a love story that had never really been hers to begin with. In the distance, the city lights blurred through her tears, and she wondered if this was what drowning felt like, sinking beneath the weight of your own foolish hopes while the world continued spinning, beautiful and indifferent and utterly unchanged by your breaking heart. The penthouse. 11:52 p.m. Daniel stood in his empty penthouse, still wearing his tuxedo, staring at the space where Lily's life had briefly intersected with his. The guest room door stood open, revealing neat stacks of boxes and suitcases lined up like soldiers preparing for retreat. She'd been efficient, methodical, packing away any evidence that she'd ever tried to make this place home. The only thing she'd left behind was a single coffee mug in the sink, the one with the chip on the handle that she'd claimed as hers. It sat there like an accusation, a reminder of morning conversations and shared silences, and the way she'd looked when she'd asked him to try being real with her. "Tell me you love me, Daniel." Her words echoed in the silence, along with his own deafening failure to answer. He'd stood there on those museum steps, watching the most genuine person he'd ever known disappear into the night, and he'd said nothing, done nothing, been nothing, just like his father. The thought hit him like a physical blow. Thomas Ashworth had been a master of calculated silence, of weighing every word against its potential cost to his reputation. He'd taught Daniel that emotions were weakness, that vulnerability was a luxury successful men couldn't afford, that love was just another transaction to be managed. And tonight, when Lily had needed him to be different, to be better, Daniel had defaulted to everything his father had taught him about protecting himself first. He walked to the terrace where they'd shared their first real conversation, where she'd told him about her father, and he'd admitted he was terrified of what she made him feel. The city sprawled below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of people who were probably braver than he was when it came to the simple act of choosing love over fear. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Sorry about the drama tonight. Daddy says the board vote is scheduled for next week. You'll be fine once all this messy personal business is settled." Messy personal business. That's what his marriage had become in the eyes of people like Victoria. An inconvenient complication, to be managed and eventually discarded. The thought made him sick. Daniel deleted the message without responding and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Connecticut. Mercy General Hospital. 12:47 a.m., Mr. Ashworth? The night nurse looked surprised to see him standing in the cardiac wing at nearly 1 in the morning, still wearing his museum gala tuxedo. "Is everything all right?" "I need to see Thomas Hartwell," Daniel said. "I know it's late, but it's important." "He's sleeping, sir. The doctor said—" "Please, I'm his son-in-law." The words felt strange in his mouth, weighted with meaning he was only beginning to understand. Son-in-law. Not business partner or financial benefactor, but family. The kind of relationship that came with obligations deeper than money. Connections. That couldn't be severed with legal documents. The nurse studied his face, apparently seeing something there that convinced her. Room 314. But keep it quiet. He needs his rest. Daniel found Thomas Hartwell exactly as Lily had described him. Diminished by illness but still radiating the quiet strength that had raised a daughter brave enough to marry a stranger to save his life. The old man's eyes opened as Daniel approached, alert despite the late hour. "Daniel?" Thomas's voice was weak but curious. "What are you doing here? Where's Lily?" The question hit Daniel like a knife to the chest. We had a disagreement. She's at the penthouse packing." Thomas studied Daniel's face with the shrewd intelligence that had built a successful business from nothing. "Packing to leave?" "Yes. And you're here instead of there, trying to change her mind." It wasn't a question, and Daniel felt the weight of judgment in the older man's gaze. "I wanted to talk to you first. To understand what?" He was embarrassed by her. Oh, he'd grown fond of her over the past weeks, enjoyed their domestic evenings and her home-cooked meals. But when faced with his real world, the world of Victoria Blackstones and social hierarchies and business relationships, she was still just the awkward arrangement he'd made to save his company. "You know what?" Lily said, her voice bright and brittle. "Victoria's absolutely right. I am grateful. Grateful for the opportunity to see how the other half lives, even if it's just temporary." She slipped her hand from Daniel's arm, the gesture, final and devastating. "Excuse me," she continued. "I think I need some air." Lily walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, her head high despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind her she could hear Daniel calling her name, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see whether he was following her or staying to manage his reputation. She made it to the museum's front steps before the tears came, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. The doorman looked concerned, but Lily waved him away, wrapping her arms around herself in the evening air. "Stupid," she told herself. "Stupid to think it could be real. Stupid to believe a man like Daniel Ashworth could actually fall in love with someone like you." "Lily, wait!" She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, his face stricken. But it was too late. The damage was done, the fragile trust they'd built shattered by his moment of hesitation. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand to stop him from coming closer. "Just don't." Victoria was being cruel. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Doesn't she?" Lily's voice was raw with pain. "Because from where I was standing it looked like she knew exactly what she was talking about. Your little domestic arrangement. Your charity case, who should be grateful enough to never cause problems." "I didn't say any of those things." "No, you didn't," Lily agreed. "But you didn't deny them either. When she called me your charity case, when she reduced our marriage to a business transaction, you stood there calculating whether defending me was worth the social cost." Daniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. "That's not—" "It is," Lily said, her voice breaking. "And the worst part is I can't even blame you. Because she's right, isn't she? I am your charity case. I did marry you for money, and I have been grateful, so pathetically grateful for every scrap of attention you've given me, that I convinced myself it was something more." Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Let him see what his moment of hesitation had cost. "The past week," Daniel said desperately, "what we've been building was a fantasy," Lily finished. "A lovely temporary fantasy that I let myself believe because I wanted so badly to be worth choosing. But we both know the truth, don't we? When it mattered, when your reputation was on the line, you chose silence over me. Lily, please." "I'm going home," she said, already turning toward the street to hail a cab. "To the penthouse, I mean." "You're home." "I'll pack my things tonight." "Where will you go?" The question stopped her cold. Where would she go? Back to Connecticut, to the house she could no longer afford, to her dying father, to explain that the marriage that was supposed to save his life had fallen apart because she'd been foolish enough to want love along with the money. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not, and I can't watch you pretend that I'm someone you actually want." A cab pulled up to the curb, and Lily moved toward it with the desperate efficiency of someone fleeing a disaster. "Lily," Daniel called after her, his voice raw with something that might have been panic. "Don't do this. Don't leave." She paused with one hand on the cab door, looking back at him one last time. In his tuxedo, framed by the museum's grand entrance, he looked like everything she'd never quite believed she deserved. Powerful, sophisticated, impossibly handsome, and completely unreachable. "Give me one reason," she said quietly. "One reason that has nothing to do with business or contracts or convenient arrangements. Tell me you love me, Daniel. Tell me I'm not just a problem you solved with money." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything he couldn't say and everything she'd never hear. Behind him, through the museum's glass doors, she could see the gala continuing. Victoria Blackstone probably already spreading the story of Daniel Ashworth's unstable wife to anyone who would listen. "I thought so," Lily said, and got into the cab. As they pulled away from the curb, she looked back once to see Daniel still standing on the steps, his hands clenched at his sides, watching her disappear into the Manhattan night. He looked like a man who'd just lost something precious, but wasn't sure he had the right to mourn it. Lily closed her eyes and tried not to think about the empty penthouse waiting for her, or the suitcases she'd have to pack, or the life she'd have to rebuild from the ashes of a love story that had never really been hers to begin with. In the distance, the city lights blurred through her tears, and she wondered if this was what drowning felt like, sinking beneath the weight of your own foolish hopes while the world continued spinning, beautiful and indifferent, and utterly unchanged by your breaking heart. The penthouse, 11:52 p.m. Daniel stood in his empty penthouse, still wearing his tuxedo, staring at the space where Lily's life had briefly intersected with his. The guest room door stood open, revealing neat stacks of boxes and suitcases lined up like soldiers preparing for retreat. She'd been efficient, methodical, packing away any evidence that she'd ever tried to make this place home. The only thing she'd left behind was a single coffee mug in the sink, the one with the chip on the handle that she'd claimed as hers. It sat there like an accusation, a reminder of morning conversations and shared silences, and the way she'd looked when she'd asked him to try being real with her. "Tell me you love me, Daniel." Her words echoed in the silence, along with his own deafening failure to answer. He'd stood there on those museum steps, watching the most genuine person he'd ever known disappear into the night, and he'd said nothing, done nothing, been nothing, just like his father. The thought hit him like a physical blow. Thomas Ashworth had been a master of calculated silence, of weighing every word against its potential cost to his reputation. He'd taught Daniel that emotions were weakness, that vulnerability was a luxury successful men couldn't afford, that love was just another transaction to be managed. And tonight, when Lily had needed him to be different, to be better, Daniel had defaulted to everything his father had taught him about protecting himself first. He walked to the terrace where they'd shared their first real conversation, where she'd told him about her father, and he'd admitted he was terrified of what she made him feel. The city sprawled below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of people who were probably braver than he was when it came to the simple act of choosing love over fear. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Sorry about the drama tonight. Daddy says the board vote is scheduled for next week. You'll be fine once all this messy personal business is settled." Messy personal business. That's what his marriage had become in the eyes of people like Victoria, an inconvenient complication, to be managed and eventually discarded. The thought made him sick. Daniel deleted the message without responding and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Connecticut, Mercy General Hospital. 12:47 a.m. Mr. Ashworth? The night nurse looked surprised to see him standing in the cardiac wing at nearly 1 in the morning, still wearing his museum gala tuxedo. Is everything all right? I need to see Thomas Hartwell, Daniel said. I know it's late, but it's important. He's sleeping, sir. The doctor said, please, I'm his son-in-law. The words felt strange in his mouth, weighted with meaning he was only beginning to understand. Son-in-law, not business partner or financial benefactor, but family. The kind of relationship that came with obligations deeper than money, connections, that couldn't be severed with legal documents. The nurse studied his face, apparently seeing something there that convinced her. Room 314. But keep it quiet. He needs his rest. Daniel found Thomas Hartwell exactly as Lily had described him. Diminished by illness but still radiating the quiet strength that had raised a daughter brave enough to marry a stranger to save his life. The old man's eyes opened as Daniel approached, alert despite the late hour. Daniel? Thomas's voice was weak but curious. What are you doing here? Where's Lily? The question hit Daniel like a knife to the chest. We had a disagreement. She's at the penthouse packing. Thomas studied Daniel's face with the shrewd intelligence that had built a successful business from nothing. Packing to leave? Yes. And you're here instead of there, trying to change her mind. It wasn't a question, and Daniel felt the weight of judgment in the older man's gaze. I wanted to talk to you first. To understand what? Daniel struggled for words that could explain the chaos in his chest. The way his carefully ordered world had been turned upside down by a woman who made over-salted gravy and left dinner notes, and looked at him like he was worth something more than his bank account. I wanted to understand how you do it, he said finally. How you love someone so completely that you'd risk everything for them. How you raise a daughter who's brave enough to sacrifice her own happiness for yours. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying Daniel with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. You want to know the secret to loving Lily? Yes. There isn't one. Thomas's smile was gentle but firm. She's not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be figured out. She's a woman who's spent her whole life believing she's not worth choosing, and every day you have to prove her wrong. How? By choosing her. Not just once, in some grand romantic gesture, but every single day. When she burns dinner, and when she's being stubborn about something silly, and when other people try to make you ashamed of her. Especially then. Daniel felt the truth of it settle in his bones like an ache. I failed her tonight. Yes, Thomas said simply. You did. The blunt honesty was somehow more devastating than any accusation. Daniel sank into the chair beside the hospital bed, feeling the weight of his cowardice crushing down on him. My father taught me that love was weakness, Daniel said quietly. That successful men don't let emotion cloud their judgment. That protecting your reputation was more important than protecting the people you care about. And what do you think now? Daniel looked at this man who was dying but still fighting, who'd raised a daughter capable of extraordinary sacrifice, who'd built a life rich in everything that actually mattered. I think my father was wrong about everything that counts, Daniel said. I think I've spent 30 years building a life that looks impressive from the outside, but feels empty on the inside. And I think I just let the best thing that ever happened to me walk away because I was too much of a coward to tell the world I love her. Thomas nodded slowly. So what are you going to do about it? The penthouse. 2:17 a.m. Daniel found Lily in the kitchen, still wearing the emerald dress from the gala, but with her feet bare and her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She was sitting at the small breakfast table where they'd shared chicken and dumplings and tentative hopes, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. You came back, she said without looking up. I never left, Daniel replied, then realized how That sounded. I mean, I went to see your father, but I came back. This is where I belong. Lily finally looked at him, and Daniel felt his heart break at the exhaustion in her eyes. Daniel, please don't. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending I love you. The words erupted from him with the force of a dam bursting, raw and desperate and completely unguarded. I love that you make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and that you cook when you're nervous, and that you've never once asked me for anything except the chance to save your father. I love that you saw possibilities in a man who'd forgotten how to hope for anything beyond his next quarterly report. Lily's hands trembled around her teacup. Daniel, I love that you turned my sterile penthouse into a home just by being in it. I love that you're brave enough to marry strangers and strong enough to walk away when you're not being treated with the respect you deserve. I love that you made me want to be a better man. Tears were streaming down Lily's face now, but she didn't speak. I failed you tonight, Daniel continued, moving closer but not daring to touch her. When Victoria attacked you, when she reduced our marriage to a business transaction, I should have defended you immediately. I should have told her and everyone else in that room that you're not my charity case or my convenient arrangement. You're my wife, and I'm the luckiest bastard alive that you chose to take a chance on me. Why didn't you? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Because I was scared. Because 30 years of my father's training doesn't disappear overnight. Because I've spent so long protecting myself from feeling anything real that when it mattered most, I defaulted to old patterns. Daniel's voice cracked. Because I'm a coward who almost lost the most important thing in his life, rather than risk looking foolish in front of people who don't matter. Lily set down her teacup with shaking hands. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't care what Victoria Blackstone thinks about our marriage. I don't care what the board thinks, or the press, or Manhattan society. I care about you, Lily. I care about us. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her chair, looking up into the face of the woman who'd taught him the difference between being successful and being alive. I'm saying that if you'll give me another chance, if you'll trust me with your heart one more time, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that choosing you was the smartest thing I've ever done. Lily searched his face, looking for any sign that this was another performance, another calculated move in their complicated dance. But all she saw was raw, terrifying honesty. A man who'd finally stopped hiding behind his armor. What about your reputation? She asked. Your business relationships? Everything you've worked for? What about them? Daniel reached for her hands, and this time she didn't pull away. Lily, I've spent 30 years building an empire, and it's never made me as happy as 1 week of eating oversalted gravy with you. The gravy wasn't that bad. It was terrible, Daniel said, and for the first time in hours, Lily smiled. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared to believe this is real. I'm scared that you'll change your mind when things get difficult. I'm scared too, Daniel admitted, but I'm more scared of losing you than I am of anything else. So I'm asking you to be brave with me one more time. Stay, Lily. Choose us. Choose me. For a moment they sat in the silence of their transformed kitchen, two wounded people on the precipice of either healing together or walking away forever. Then Lily leaned forward and kissed him, soft, tentative, but real. Okay, she whispered against his lips. Let's try. And in that simple word, Daniel heard everything he'd never dared to hope for. Forgiveness, second chances, and the radical possibility that love might actually be worth the risk after all. 6 months later, the Ashworth Foundation. Annual gala. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled with Manhattan's finest, but Daniel only had eyes for the woman beside him. Lily wore a midnight blue gown that complemented her newfound confidence, her hair swept up to showcase the simple pearl necklace that had been his grandmother's, a family heirloom he'd never thought to share with anyone until now. Nervous? He asked, adjusting his tie for the third time in 10 minutes. Terrified, Lily admitted, then smiled. But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something that matters. 6 months ago, Daniel would have been focused. On the guest list, the business connections, the potential deals floating through conversations over champagne and canapes. Tonight, he was focused on the small miracle of his wife's hand in his, steady and sure, as they prepared to announce the launch of the Ashworth Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to funding experimental medical treatments for families who couldn't afford them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice rang out over the crowd, "please welcome Daniel and Lily Ashworth." They walked to the podium together, and Daniel felt the familiar weight of hundreds of eyes assessing them. But this time, instead of calculating the social cost of being seen with his unconventional wife, he felt only pride. "Good evening," Daniel began, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire but softened with something that hadn't been there before: joy. "My wife and I want to thank you for joining us tonight for a cause that's very close to our hearts." He paused, looking out at the crowd that included many of the same people who'd witnessed their low point 6 months ago. Victoria Blackstone sat at a front table, her expression carefully neutral. Marcus Wellington had surprisingly become one of their largest donors after Daniel's public transformation, had impressed the board and led to Ashworth Industries' most profitable quarter in years. "Many of you know that our marriage began as a business arrangement," Daniel continued, and Lily squeezed his hand encouragingly. "What you might not know is that it became something much more important. A partnership built on the radical idea that love is not a luxury, but a necessity." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Daniel pressed on. "When Lily agreed to marry me, it was to save her father's life. Thomas Hartwell needed experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover, and I needed—" Daniel paused, his eyes finding Lily's. "I thought I needed a convenient wife. What I actually needed was someone brave enough to show me what really matters." The ballroom had gone completely quiet, the usual background chatter of society events replaced by genuine attention. "The Ashworth Foundation exists because we believe that love shouldn't be a privilege of the wealthy," Lily said, stepping forward to speak for the first time at a public event. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying the conviction that had first drawn Daniel to her. "Every family deserves the chance to fight for the people they love, regardless of their bank account." She looked out at the crowd with the same fearless grace she'd shown in the boardroom that day, and Daniel felt his heart swell with pride. "My father is alive today because a man I barely knew was willing to invest in love," Lily continued. "Tonight, we're asking you to make the same investment. In families like mine, in hope, in the belief that everyone deserves a chance at their own miracle." The applause that followed was thunderous, genuine, and Daniel realized that somewhere in the past 6 months, they'd gone from being Manhattan's most talked-about oddity to being genuinely respected. Not because they'd conformed to society's expectations, but because they'd had the courage to be authentically themselves. Later that evening, the penthouse terrace. "I can't believe we raised $2 million in one night," Lily said, kicking off her heels and settling into Daniel's arms on the outdoor sofa they'd bought together 3 months ago. The city sparkled below them, but the view that captivated Daniel was much closer. "I can," Daniel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You have a way of making people believe in impossible things." "Like what?" "Like the idea that a cold, calculating businessman could learn how to love." Lily tilted her head back to look at him. "You were never cold, Daniel. You were just scared. There's a difference. How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Practice," Lily said with a grin. "I've been married to you for 8 months now. I've learned all your tells." 8 months! It felt like a lifetime and an instant all at once. The penthouse had been completely transformed, not just with Lily's belongings, but with the evidence of a life shared. books scattered on every surface, photographs from their weekend trips to Connecticut to visit Thomas, the comfortable mess of two people who'd stopped pretending to be perfect. "Speaking of practice," Daniel said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something for you." "Daniel, we talked about this. You don't need to keep buying me things." "This isn't about need," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. "This is about want." Lily's eyes went wide. "Is that a ring that actually means something?" Daniel said, opening the box to reveal a vintage emerald surrounded by diamonds. Not the massive solitaire his stylist had chosen for their fake engagement, but something chosen with thought and love. "I know we're already married, but I wanted to ask you properly this time." He slid off the couch and onto one knee, just like he should have done the first time, and took her hand in his. "Lily Hartwell Ashworth," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you stay married to me? Not because of contracts or arrangements or medical bills, but because you love me enough to keep choosing me every day for the rest of our lives." Tears streamed down Lily's face as she looked at this man who'd learned to kneel, to be vulnerable, to risk everything for love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. I'll stay married to you." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, just like everything else about their imperfect, authentic, absolutely real love story. "I have something for you too," Lily said, wiping her eyes and reaching for a small wrapped package she'd hidden behind a cushion. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a set of aviation charts. "Flight lessons," she explained at his confused expression. "It's never too late to be a crop duster pilot, even if it's just on weekends." Daniel stared at the gift, at this woman who remembered his childhood dreams and thought they were worth pursuing, and felt his heart overflow with gratitude for the day he'd been desperate enough to marry a stranger. "I love you," he said, the words as easy as breathing now. "I love you too," Lily replied, salt and all. 1 year later, Connecticut. The small church in Millbrook was packed with people who'd never attended a society wedding, but understood the deeper meaning of love. Thomas Hartwell, healthy and beaming, walked his daughter down the aisle for the second time. But this wedding was different from their first. This time, Daniel's eyes never left Lily's face as she approached. This time, when he promised to love and cherish her, his voice broke with emotion. This time when she said, "I do," she meant every word with her whole heart. "You may kiss the bride," the minister said. And Daniel did. Deeply, passionately, with all the love he'd been too afraid to show the first time. The reception was held in the garden behind Thomas's house, with string lights and home-cooked food and laughter that could be heard 3 blocks away. Daniel's corporate friends mingled with Lily's teacher colleagues, Manhattan sophistication mixing with small-town warmth, in a way that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "So," Thomas said, approaching Daniel as the evening wound down, "any regrets about leaving the bachelor life behind?" Daniel looked across the garden where Lily was dancing with her third-grade students, her dress grass-stained and her hair falling loose, laughing with pure joy as 8-year-olds spun her in circles. "Only one," Daniel said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "I regret that it took me 35 years to figure out what happiness actually looks like." As if she'd heard him, Lily looked up and caught his eye across the crowded garden. Her smile was radiant, uncomplicated, full of the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. She beckoned him over, and Daniel went willingly, ready to be spun in circles by the woman who'd taught him that the best things in life were worth the risk. "Dance with me, husband," she said, reaching for his hand. "Always," Daniel replied, pulling her into his arms as the string quartet played and the stars came out over Connecticut, blessing two people who'd found their way to love through the most unexpected path of all. Years later, when people asked Daniel about the secret to their marriage, he would tell them what Thomas Hartwell had taught him in a hospital room at 1 a.m. "There is no secret. Love is a choice you make every day, in small moments and grand gestures, in sickness and health, in good times and bad, in oversalted gravy and perfectly ordinary miracles. And every day, Daniel chose Lily. And every day, she chose him back. It turned out that was enough. More than enough, it was everything.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.